Cherry Audio has launched Chroma, an emulation of a very interesting vintage synthesizer. It has a lot of unique features and I spent a long time experimenting with them. So I created a preset pack for it, 65 different sounds for this synthesizer. And by the way, most of the sound examples I will show you today are from my preset pack. You can find the links for that in the description. But of course, what's important if this synthesizer is for you or not, and I'm here to help you decide. Not only that, I'm going to give you some tricks and tips of the sounds that you can get using this synth. This synth is an emulation of the Rhodes Chroma. Yeah, the same company of the electric piano. For the times, it was very advanced, especially for the multiple oscillator routings that it offered. Now, the issue was it worked with buttons instead of knobs, and that made things slow. But now, thanks to software capabilities, this emulation takes the workflow and makes it a lot faster and better. Basically, it's a 2-oscillator synthesizer. The interesting thing is that each oscillator has its own filter and also its own modulators. They even have their own amplitude envelope. So you can program very different things with one or the other. Then all of that goes to the effects section, which have a distortion phaser, flanger or chorus, delay, and reverb with the galactic reverb. Finally, we have a 3-band EQ. Now, as you see, besides the EQ, we have a mode that says dual layer. That's because this, as many other synthesizers by Cherry Audio, has a second layer, which is practically the same as the first one. So you expand the workflow and you now get 2 synthesizers in one. Now, the second layer is called expander because actually the Rhodes Chroma had an expander that was basically the same. So yeah, now we have oscillators C and D, each one with its own filter and envelopes and LFO, which is called sweep by the way, and each layer can have its own effects or they can share the effects. Now the EQ and the limiter are always global. So straight away we have 4 voices that we can play with, and only with that we have many options. But as I mentioned earlier, the special thing about this synth are the routing options. You can select them here in patch configuration or just by clicking these icons at the top. The options are a lot and the icons will let you know which are the routing that you're using. For instance, on dual layer we have 2 oscillators with independent filters and independent amplitudes that go to the output. But of course it gets interesting when we apply syncing, because now oscillator B sync to oscillator A. Or we can make it so oscillator B rings modulate oscillator A. Then the ring modulation goes to filter A and then to amplitude A and so on. We have filter FM, and this one is interesting because it's not oscillator B on its own that's frequency modulating the cutoff point of filter A. It's actually the output of the layer B. So if we change the sound with filter B, we will change how that frequency modulation behaves. This is especially interesting if we apply resonance to filter B. Now the filters can be parallel, that means that oscillator B goes to filter B and filter A. We can set them also into series, so filter A goes to filter B, or we can set it on variable filters. So yeah, now you understand why at the time this synthesizer was considered to be very advanced. And remember, we have the expander, which also have its own routing options that are independent of the ones on Chroma. Now the routing is the big feature of this synth, but still there are other smaller features that I like a lot. For instance, the arpeggiator. It's not something that you activate or not, it's actually a voicing option, right here where it says poly. This will affect oscillator A and B at the same time. Now you can see we don't have options for octaves. That's because this is a special kind of arpeggiator. It will only arpeggiate the keys that you start pressing on your keyboard. And as long as you keep pressing one note, it's going to play all of the new keys that you press, which also is going to change the rhythm, and that's what makes it special for me. So those are basically all the most interesting things about the synth. I really liked it, otherwise I would not have made a preset pack for it. Seriously, go and check it out. And because of that, besides the review, I want to show you different tips and tricks of sounds that I find interesting to make in this synth. By the way, the sounds that we made with these tips are the presets that I'm going to upload to my Patreon and members pages, so consider joining one of those. First of all, as I already talked about the arpeggiator and how one layer is independent from the other, there are some different ways I like to experiment with that. For instance, in this patch I made one layer to play an arpeggiator, it's 12 semitones up, and the second layer is 12 semitones down, and that way I created a bass. But the bass is not arpeggiated, it's a constant note, so I can play an arpeggio and a bass progression at the same time. The interesting thing about doing it this way instead of splitting the keyboard is that every new bass note will be added to the arpeggio. That will make the progression change and also will change the rhythm. Now, the other thing that you can do is having two arpeggiators at the same time but choosing different time signatures, especially if one is straight and the other is dotted or triplet. This will give you a polyrhythmic arpeggio. Another thing that I already mentioned is how the Chroma layer and the expander layer can have independent effects. This is very interesting to use when you think about the expander as a wet layer. Let me explain. For instance, we have this dry signal, a simple pluck, and then we copy that to the expander layer. Now we go to the effects, and we can start applying everything at 100% wet, and that will let us create different nice things that are different from the dry signal. The thing that I discovered I like to do with this technique is actually creating a shimmer reverb, and it's pretty easy to make. You just have to take the wet layer, in this case the expander, and make it so the oscillator is 12 semitones up or even 24 semitones up. Then you go to the reverb, you go 100% wet and choose the galactic reverb. Now, there are other things that you can do. As you see, Chroma and the expander have different panning options. So you can put one all the way left and the other all the way right and copy the same parameters from one to the other. It's going to sound exactly the same, but for instance, we can use the sweep, which is the LFO, to control the cutoff point. Make it so both are triggered at the same time, but one is a sine wave and the other is a cosine wave. So they are going to be out of phase, meaning now we created a rotary effect. As you can see, I've been having a lot of fun with this synth, but let me know your opinions in the comments down below, consider buying my preset pack, and I will see you next time. Bye bye!